Christina Braver is an author of steamy, small town contemporary romance novels set in the beautiful Pacific Northwest. Her stories delve into the complexities of a real person experiencing genuine love, always culminating in a satisfying, happily ever after. With an MA in clinical psychology, Christina's background as a social worker and project manager in healthcare technology enriches her writing with depth and authenticity. She is passionate about presenting passionate heroes with strong sides, soft sides, and sassy heroines who navigate societal expectations. Christina believes that romance novels not only entertain, but also provoke thought and enhance lives by incorporating real information and promoting all important sex positivity. Residing near Seattle, she balances a writing career with family life, sharing a home with a husband and two teenagers. You're very welcome. We've already talked for half an hour before we hit record. So thank you for all the time you're going to give me today. Really, really appreciate it. And
Thank
and it was
you. Thank you.
and Christina was very kind, and she let me read a couple of her novels that yeah, I think they were really interesting. And I want to come on to a lot of the points that came out of them when I read them. So, but first of all, I have to ask, what made you decide to become a writer? It's not the easiest thing in the world. And then why the genre you chose, and how do you go about your writing process?
Well, I became a writer. I started out as a therapist I have a master's in clinical, as you mentioned, and I was a therapist for a few years. But being a therapist and studying therapy are two very different things. One is a science, one is more of an art. And I was not an artist in that space. It was not a job that I could do as well as what needed to be done. It was very impactful for me. So I changed jobs. I went into healthcare technology. My husband and I moved from the Midwest out here to the Pacific Northwest, and I got into healthcare technology. And then with COVID, I got laid off, like so many people. I worked in that field for 20 years, and then like so many people, I was laid off with COVID. And my husband makes a perfectly fine living, and he said, if we can't live on what I make, we're doing it wrong. So why don't you just stay home? Which was a thing for me. Someone who'd worked and made money all my life. That was an adjustment. And so I said, well, I have to do something. I can't sit around, and I'll helicopter our children to near death if I don't have something to distract me. And he said, well, what do you want to do? And I said, well, I want to read romance novels all day. And he said, well, you're a writer, you're smart, or you can write, you're smart. You know all this information about people and relationships. Why don't you write one? So I did, and I just fell in love with it. And so that is how I became a writer. I fell into it, and I didn't want to be a writer. It wasn't my childhood dream, or anything like that. Um, but now I love it. I just love it.
And did it come very naturally to include quite sexual scenes in it? So for those that haven't read any of the books, I advise you to go and read them. The orgasm, clit, dick, pussy, fucking, the words are all in there. It's not graphic, but as you said before, it's very open door and it's very explicit. So did that come fairly naturally straight away?
Um, yes, because that's what I read.
Okay.
Um, I I read Open Door. I read Explicit and I write explicit largely because I think there's so much that happens in between the characters when they are both literally and figuratively naked.
Yeah.
You're you're in that space with that human. You're naked in a lot of ways. And there's a lot of character development that goes on there in the relationship. There's that connection. There's a lot that comes out of that that indicates that this is going to be good or indicates that this is not going to be good. So that's what intrigues me is the characters. And so much of the character comes out in those sexy scenes if they're done well, if they're done right. And so that's what I read. And the majority of what I read is done well and done right. So uh, even if it's not done well, I still am like, this is how I would do it better. So it's still interesting. But yeah. So it did it come naturally? Actually, yes, it did. Um, it, there's a part of I'm older. There is certainly a part of me that my mother has read my books. My I grew up outside of Nashville, Tennessee. My tender Southern mother in her late 80s has read my books. So there's a part of her that's sort of like, well, fiddly dee, kind of. And so I think about that sometimes. Or one of the I have some friends who are older. I participate in some discussion groups with, and some of the people that in that are quite a bit older than me. And I was writing my first sex scene, and there's a gentleman. He was so supportive. Oh, I can't wait to read your first book. I'm writing the sex scene. I'm like, oh, Mr. Graham is going to read this. you know. I'm like, uh, but other than that, after getting over that hump, no, it comes really naturally. It flows with the characters. It's not really
Mm.
me. It's more that what the characters would say.
Hmm.
Some of the things my characters say are not really things that I say, but it's consistent with the character. So
Mm. One thing I really liked with even in the short stories I've read is the characters are fully formed. They're not a sort of an approximation of a person. They feel like real people. And I think from
thank
the
you.
masculine side, so I think the characters are passionate, but they possess this sort of softer, more open side. So there's been a lot of talk lately about toxic masculinity and men trying to be overly men and the role of men in society. How do you create a fully formed character that is masculine and passionate, but has that softer, I'd say more vulnerable side?
Thank you for saying that my characters were real. That's the goal of any writer, right?
Mhm.
First of all, I do a lot of research about sex and sexuality. I read a ton of books by prominent sex therapists. I listen to a ton of podcasts. I listen to as many podcasts on the topic by men as I possibly can, because men they don't want to publicly, typically they don't seem to want to come out publicly and say, oh, here's some questions I have about sex. you know. Um, so I try to gather all the information that I can, and then I sort of observe the world, and I think about certainly my beautiful partner, um, and I try to think about what and my friends' partners, and the things that I know about my friends' partners, and I try to think about what I think men are really like, instead of what culture tells me that men are like. And culture tells me that all of them have big dicks, which is not true, and that's a good thing. I can tell you why. Um, and that they're all, I know what you want, baby, and I'm going to give it to you good. And they all just are interested in their own pleasure, and they want a woman who is looks this way and acts this way and talks this way. And, none of that is true. I, I've not observed any of that to be true or to be written about in a truthful way by experts in sex and sexuality. So I try to write characters that resonate more with men who are diverse.
Mm.
Not just, I don't mean diverse in sort of the traditional word of the
Mhm.
meaning
Yeah,
of the
yeah.
term, but more complex characters, right? Yes, they like sex, and sure they like boobs, and but it's not the way that they talk about that, and the way that they experience that, and the way that they appreciate that is a different. They present differently in the bedroom with their partner than culture tells me that men would present. I think there's a lot of information out there that men are getting that's doing them a huge disservice. And so I try to write characters that do men a better service, paint them as loving people, not soft necessarily. I mean, maybe some people might say so, but you know, I think that a good lover is someone who pays attention to what his lover likes and tries to do more of that. And that's what I try to write, is just men who pay attention to their partner and what they like, and try to do more of that.
Yeah, there's one particular scene I wanted to. I'll come on to it in a second, but it really demonstrates what you just talked about, really. And you were kind enough to say when we were talking before hitting record that it's hard for men sometimes, and it's not often something you necessarily hear. And I think because you were quite right, there is so much information out there, but information doesn't necessarily equate to knowledge. So I talked to a couple of female adult content creators, so porn stars, recently, and both of them were absolutely wonderful, wonderful people. But they were saying the last thing they would want is for people to look at porn for education. If you're older and you want to look at something and try something different, it's fine. But there's a really fine nuance with porn. I think um, you have ethical porn. If people haven't looked it up, look it up. Typically directed by women, and I've got a lady director, Inca Winters, coming on in a few weeks, and it's more like your stories in a way that there is a story and it is nuanced, and the passion and sex is absolutely there. People are full on naked. It's proper sex. Or you have as 3 billion people a month do, go onto Pornhub and you see a sort of a 2-minute scene. Well, as you say, if you watch that as a man, you think, oh gosh, I haven't got a 9-inch penis. But if you researched a little bit and found out that most nerve endings in the vagina are in the first couple of inches, you don't need actually having a huge penis isn't comfortable for most women.
No,
And
it isn't.
it is that challenge where we see, and children in particular, 12, 13-year-old boys can access porn at that age now. When I was younger, when we were younger, porn then was a page torn out of a Playboy magazine that your old brother might have had. And it was like, oh my God, she's naked. Whereas now it's very different. So as a man, so as somebody that researches this, and with sons, and I've got a son, and how do we share knowledge? Because we both agree that sex education, the name isn't fit for purpose. At the very best, it might say, this is how to put a condom on and don't get an STI. But it doesn't talk about feelings or explaining that sex is a good and natural thing. It doesn't do any of those sort of things. So
Consent. It
how
doesn't.
do we communicate those things? Sorry, that's a massive question. But how do
No.
we help young teenagers, and men understand that sex is something, A, to enjoy, B, to talk about, and C, to understand, explain, and just play with, really.
I think first of all, it starts with communication, like we talked
Mhm.
about. I think culturally, we need to get the message out to our men that we have told you for centuries that we expect you to know how to do this, but that's not realistic. We actually don't expect you to know how to do this from the very beginning, right? We need to provide real information. When culture isn't prepared to do that, I think we need to try to find ways to do that in the home. And there's tons of
Mm.
information out there, books that parents can read, and um, that's a huge leap, though. That's for some families and parents, that's a huge leap. I
Gosh, yeah.
certainly, my son, I have a son who is 22. He is 6'5", 280. He's a very large human, and he was large from the get-go. And so one of the things that he has said to me the most, when the first sex conversation he remembers me, about the birds and the bees telling him, was about consent. And I think it scared him, was why he remembers it the most. But I think we have to have those conversations with our children. We have to talk about how um, you don't have to know everything. Here's some resources. I've actually sent him some links to things and said, we don't have to talk about this. Put this on dad's credit card and I will never know that you went to this website and looked at this information. There is information out there. There's
Yeah.
websites, quality websites out there to help educate men in particular about sex. Um, OMG Yes is a website out of the University of Indiana, which is where the Kinsey Institute is, which is a famous,
Mhm.
world recognized resource for sex and sexual information. So that's a great resource, particularly for men, on how to please a vulva. That is specifically what it's about and what it's geared toward. So, I tell all my friends who have sons, here's this website. It costs. I mean, it's not free. If what you're looking at is free, that should be your first red flag that it's not probably good.
Yes.
Um, you should pay for information. So I think we have to get that information out there. There are resources to help parents do it. And I think we have to start doing more of what I am trying to do, which is, in a very subtle way, get information out there that men are not one thing, that they're not one dimensional. Um, we need to let people know that porn is porn. The purpose of porn, and it has a purpose. Ethical
Mhm.
porn definitely has a purpose, and I encourage people of all genders to, as adults, to find ethical porn and to look at it and understand how it impacts them and what's interesting to them about it, and it'll help them kind of get to know themselves. Um, but we need to let people know that porn is not education, particularly for our
Yeah.
young people. Um, we have young people looking at porn and they try to do well. They this in porn, he came all over her face and she loved it. I came all over my girlfriend's face and she didn't. I didn't did I do it wrong? And I'm like, I'm
Yes.
super cringy, right? I mean, oh, so, but they don't know that. They see that in porn and they think that's what it's supposed to be. So we just have to get information out that porn is entertainment, not education. Here is education. And then we have to make it okay for men to want to get educated. So we have to say, you don't have to know everything from the beginning. It's okay. You're not supposed to know long division automatically, and you don't have to know where a woman's clitoris is automatically either. So let's help you figure both of those things out. Maybe at the same time, like the same, you know, time in your life, you should be learning both of those things. So.
Yeah, I can guarantee one of them is far more enjoyable than the other. Um, but
Yeah.
don't they say though? I think there's two things men don't like to be criticised about. One is their driving, and two is how they have sex. So I think it is accepting that it's okay to learn to be an advanced driver, to learn to be a much better driver, and it's okay to like I said the things that we knew when we were 15, 16, 17, 18. If you sort of think, well, that's it now, I know it. That's it. You're missing out on a lot of things, and you're not experiencing joy for yourself or your partner. So, both people are meant to enjoy the situation and being able to talk about things that you do enjoy. And that was what I saw in one of your books. So in one of the chapters there, the woman in question and a partner are sort of having sex, and the woman is finding it difficult to orgasm purely from penetration. So she wants to bring one of her toys into play. I think firstly, it was really good to recognize that a lot of women can't orgasm from penetration, no matter what the majority of men might think. And secondly, I think it was very good to see his reaction was very welcoming of sort of whatever it takes. And I think for men, it's really important to have that self confidence that the toy isn't there to replace you, that whatever it's something that is going to make this a better experience for both of us. And yeah, so how important is that to sort of show that the men have the confidence in themselves and in the partner that they're with?
I think that's essential. That's an essential part of every couple that I write. Um,
Mhm.
there's an awareness that toys accentuate the experience. They do not replace the partner. That if you can be replaced by a toy, you need to look at what you're doing in the bedroom and what you're not doing in the bedroom.
Yeah.
Um, and it's interesting, it's true. About 70% of women cannot orgasm by penetration alone. And I read a comparison. So many things you said I want to respond to, but I'm going to try to rein it in. Um, I read a comparison that so the the clitoris has 10,000 nerve endings. The opening of the vagina has around 2,000 to 3,000. Um, a man's penis has around 3,000, 4,000. The testicles have around 2,000. So if a man putting his penis in a woman's vagina and expecting that to be thinking about what that feels like for a woman's perspective, it feels like you rubbing your testicles on my clitoris. You're taking the thing that has less nerve endings
Yeah.
and rubbing it on the thing that has more nerve endings than me.
Mhm.
Whereas a penis and a vagina is a man taking the thing that has more nerve endings and rubbing it on the thing that has less nerve endings than her. So if you think about, well, I don't understand why a woman can't come from penetration. Well, could you come from rubbing your balls on my clitoris? Would that be satisfying for you? Maybe, maybe you could, but would you all the time? It's kind of putting it in that perspective. So, yeah, as far as like using toys in the bedroom, like I said, I think if you have a fear of being replaced by a toy, then I think you need to look at what you're doing in the bedroom. You're not doing all that you could be doing, all that you could be doing. And toys they just accentuate the process. And I try to really promote that. And that's one of the ways that I try to counteract toxic masculinity in my books is to make sure that my heroes are like, yeah, let's get that vibrator in here, baby, and let's make that happen. And here's a vibrator we can use while I'm inside you. And oh, it feels good for me too. And
Yeah.
here's some, all of these there's so many different kinds of toys out there.
Mm.
Reputable sites online, they come to you in unmarked packaging. Like there's no reason to be intimidated about investigating or ordering for your partner. Lube, particularly as women get older, we're unable to self lubricate in a lot of ways. And lube, there's no reason that you shouldn't use lube. I mean, there's men out there who think, oh, if my partner really is into this, she'll be able to self lubricate. We don't need to use lube. And it's like, well, that's a little bit of a
Yeah.
biological falsehood. So don't be intimidated by that stuff. It's all normal and natural. And the things that when culture tells us that they aren't, those are the things that we need to put aside and not pay attention to.
Mm. Gosh, there's a lot there I want to respond to now. We can
Well,
go
and
back and
your
forward.
car, men not wanting to be criticized for their driving. So Emily Nagowski, who is a prominent sex therapist, wrote a book called Come As You Are. And in this book, she talks about the dual response model, which she did not create. I will forget the scientist that created it, so forgive me. But the dual response model in women is the sexual response. So women's sexual response is not just the accelerator. Um, in men, it's a lot of push the accelerator and they're turned on. In women, you can push our accelerator, but if you're also pushing our brakes, and there's a lot of things in life that push a woman's brakes, like
Yes.
responsibilities, distractions,
Yeah.
child rearing, hormone, the changes in our brains based on when we can't move from from cooking dinner and putting the children to bed. That increases our estrogen levels and lowers our testosterone levels. We can't go from that immediately to a freak in the bed 5 minutes later. We just don't have the testosterone in our brains to do it. Um, so there's a lot of things that can be standing on our brakes. And if you're driving a car, you can push the accelerator and the brake at the same time. The car will still go. Probably won't get very far. Probably won't be very fun, and probably do some damage. But you can do it.
Yeah.
Um, as men, as lovers of vulva owners, we need to take a look at how can we let off the brakes and push the accelerator and make that car go a little bit better. You're going to be a better driver
Yeah.
if you pay attention to pushing the accelerator and letting off the brakes. So
Mm. And
hopefully that
something,
resonates.
and it absolutely does. And something you said before we hit record was that, and something I think your partner said to you is that, yeah, men aren't going to say no to a blowjob, no matter what no matter how much the wallpaper's peeling off or whatever. You've got to go in and brush up. And I think, but I think that's quite different for women. Like I say, it's not just an immediate right on,
Right.
right off, and no, okay, thanks very much. It's not like that. So I think there's
Right. I mean, for me, I think for women, and I'm the woman that I know the most about. Um, I it I would turn down oral if the situation wasn't right. If it wasn't what we won't get into the details, but if the situation weren't right, there are cases, and they aren't that rare, that I would absolutely turn down oral. I'm not in a space that I can be present for that. Yes, and my husband, I wrote a scene where a woman was wanting to give head to her partner, and he was like, "No, babe, I want to be here for you." And my husband said, "No man will ever turn down oral." He said, "You can't take that out of the book. It's unrealistic. I cannot stand for this." So anyway, it was sort of funny.
no, it is, and I think there's the again, something you said before was that, and I always knew it, but I hadn't necessarily thought of it. Is that the clitoris is the only part of either male or female bodies that is designed purely for sexual enjoyment. It doesn't serve any other purpose. So it has to. You have to think, well, if it's there, if it's so important, surely the stimulation of that is going to be critical. And when I talked to women before, I think the orgasm that some women get from penetration and the orgasm they get from clitoral stimulation, whether that be with a toy, with your fingers, with your tongue, or whatever, they're very different orgasms. And
Mhm.
they feel different in the body, and obviously the man, I don't know how they feel, but the explanation I get is that they do feel quite different. So being able to, because surely you'd want to, if you had the possibility to do it, you'd want to give the person you love or desire or whatever as much pleasure as possible, wouldn't you? That's just, you'd hope so anyway.
I would hope so. I would absolutely hope so. I think if my partner didn't want to give
Mm.
me that pleasure, that would be a red flag. That I
Yeah.
would be like, maybe I don't need to be your partner, or maybe you don't need to be mine. Yeah, and it's true. You know, some people say, that men sort of have orgasm kind of feels the same to a guy. What, orgasm is orgasm is orgasm, and that women do have sort of different kinds of orgasms, based on where they're like, whether it's from the G spot, which is basically just another part of the clitoris,
Hmm.
or if it's, considered specifically clitoral. Even anal stimulation can bring on a different in level intensity of orgasm in some women. So I don't know if orgasm feels the same to men or not, but that sometimes the idea of orgasm can be intimidating for both partners. And I think it's important to, I orgasm is super duper important, but it isn't the only thing that's important. And there are women in particular who are unable to orgasm for biological reasons, for
Yep.
trauma reasons. Um, and if your partner is that way, it's important to understand that about your partner. But there's also other ways you can give your partner pleasure, and getting that information and communicating and talking about how to connect. Um, older People who get older, men are unable to maintain erection,
Hmm.
and sometimes need to get a little help in that department, which no shade to that. But I've done a lot of research on sex over 60. And one of the things, I read a book that's sort of a compilation of stories, and one couple of them really stood out. But one guy said, and I actually ended up putting something like this in one of my books, but he said, "Oh, I'm not worried about sex because as long as my tongue works, I'm good." It's like, I'm not worried about pleasing a woman as long as my tongue works.
Yeah.
I've got it. And I thought that was a really funny and it's just really spot on way to look at it. There isn't one way to have sex. There isn't one way to connect. There's all these different ways. And I think we just need to be educated and explore and communicate and be open to those.
Very much so. And I think almost one of the challenges is that I think when we're younger, we think of sex as being the penetration, typically penis into vagina. And even the language we use, so have you had sex yet? Did you have sex with her? It sort of just talks about the act. And almost if we in our minds replace the word sex with pleasure, so have you had pleasure? Did you have pleasure together? So the actual act of penetration doesn't necessarily need to be part of it. You think how intimate kissing is, you think how intimate stroking is, think how intimate somebody brushing your hair or holding you, whatever. That's all part of sex, not this sort of, I guess, typical. I'm sure it's global, but certainly Western is that you build up to these, right? So it's a minute doing this, 2 minutes doing that, and it's that there you go. And even there's a scene in Friends, I think, where one of the women is talking to the men about the better way to have sex, and she's like numbers the body. It's like a 1, 2, 3. So it's a 1, 1. It's a 2, 2, 1,
Yeah.
2, 3,
Yeah.
3, 4. And it's literally this. It's almost like a symphony, and that isn't necessarily. Yeah, and exactly as you say, as men get older, we have erectile dysfunction. As some women go through menopause, it becomes more challenging from both an emotional, mental perspective and a physical perspective. And to think, right, we just won't have sex because the only sex we can have is this penetration is such a shame, really, because pleasure is something altogether different. So if you can give each other or give yourself pleasure, it's much more. I think that's much more part of what being a human is all about, really, is experiencing pleasure as opposed to just having sex as such.
Well, and I absolutely agree. And in fact, the book that I shared with you earlier, I'm
Hmm.
just really caught up in the current book that I'm writing. It's due to my editor in 17 days, and I'm behind. Um, and I'm a little frantic about it, frankly. But one of the sexual growth arc of this couple is that he's only had penetrative sex intercourse with 3 women. But he's 30 years old. He's good looking. He's confident. He has a job. He's out there. Um, and the woman, his partner, is would-be partners like, "Well, I don't understand what you mean you've only had three partners. Like, how is that even possible?" And he's like, "Well, I've only had intercourse with three women, but if you want to know how many people I've given an orgasm to or received an orgasm from, that's an entirely different number, and one that I don't actually know because I didn't write it down in my diary." He sort of comes from the perspective that sex, he says to her, it depends on what you call sex,
Yeah.
and so he sort of talks about, um, well, and then there's another scene where he says, if all we do is kiss, that's fine. He's like, kissing you in some of my favorite places is one of my favorite things to do. A lot of times we talk about kissing, we just think about kissing on the mouth, but kissing happens all over the body and is pleasurable in lots of different places, and for some women even more pleasurable than penetration.
Yeah.
So, he's this kind of athletic, virile, sexy guy, and he's only had three partners, and she was kind of like, "I've had seven. Like, how can you not have had, it's stunning to her that she's had more than him, which is also a cultural phenomenon.
Mm.
Most women expect to have less than men, which I don't completely know how that math works, but that's neither here nor there. Yeah, it's just, I think, I'm so I love him so much because he's more about the pleasure, and that's
Mm.
again how I try to fight those stereotypes of toxic masculinity. As I want to write characters who are more interested in the woman's pleasure than their stats on their board, and I think there's a lot of men out there who, whether or not they will admit it, feel the same way. Who would rather focus on pleasing their partner than the stats on their board, how many people they've slept with, how many
Yeah.
vaginas they've penetrated, those kinds of things.
Yeah. I think one thing your books do, if a woman reads them or is reading them, or maybe then the partner picks it up and reads through it as well, and one thing they do is help, or hopefully help people recognize that some of the fantasies they have are not unique to themselves. And it's not that your books are it's completely out there and on people having sex hanging from a lamppost on a spaceship or whatever. It's
I
fairly
don't know
it's
how to write
fairly
that.
no, it's fairly regular, hopefully normal, sexy sex, which is good. But I think that's one thing that we keep to ourselves quite a lot, are our fantasies. And I think that the thing about fantasies is that a fantasy isn't something we necessarily want to experience or do. That the fantasy itself is enough in and of itself. But I do think sort of sharing fantasies, thoughts, what people might think they enjoy or what they've seen or whatever, I do think that's important. But I do think a lot of couples don't necessarily do that. And I wanted to get how do we get people talking about things that they haven't and might not necessarily want to experience, but they want to share something that they fantasize about with their partner. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, absolutely. And romance novels are a huge, can be a huge part of that. And that's kind of what my platform is a little bit, if you will. I talk about how romance novels can make your sex life better, and
Hmm.
one of the ways that reading romance novels can make your sex life better for both partners, and one of the ways that they can do that is, I'm reading a romance novel, and then I read another one and another one, and there's an author that I personally really like, and she writes a little bit damsel in distress, and a big hero comes in and saves her. And while I don't necessarily want that in real life. I'm a competent, woman that could, hear me roar. Um, but it is a fantasy to have someone come in and take care of all my problems. Um, One of the things that we can do is we can take a look at what sort of romance novels we're drawn to as women readers. What are the things that we find consistent with all the heroes that we like? For example, maybe I'm reading romance novels and the hero is always really obsessed with the
Mhm.
character, with really obsessed with the heroine. Well, that's not safe in real life. I can't date someone. I can't be with someone who's obsessed with me. I mean, that is stalker. That leans towards stalker in the best situation, right? So that's not safe in real life, but it is my fantasy to have this person obsessed with me. They can't think. How can I bring that into my real relationship with my trusted partner in a healthy way? And
Yeah.
one of the ways is maybe I can talk with him about like, this just turns me on, this idea that you would be so consumed with me that sexually that you just had to have me. So maybe my partner calls me on Friday and says, from work and says, I'm having trouble focusing. All I can do is think about you. I'm imagining you in this outfit that you wore last weekend. And I'm just imagining that you'll be wearing that when I get home tonight. And so then he texts me an hour, then he takes the phone, he goes back to work. Like, it doesn't have to be true. He can tell me that. All he has to do is tell me these things. And then maybe he texts me and he says, I'm still thinking about you. And then, and I say, well, I love this idea that, I'll be wearing what you wear, I'll be wearing whatever you tell me what you want me to wear. And then you can do to me what you wish whenever you walk in the door, if I'm wearing it or whatever. So maybe he says that. And then I wear it. And then he comes in the door and he falls on me and we have mad, passionate sex in the entryway because the kids are off at sleepovers. These are, those are safe ways to have that experience of my partner being obsessed with me and all he can think about is having sex with me. And then I'm living that fantasy in a safe way. But if I don't know that about myself, I can't communicate that to him. He may not want to do those things because some cultures, or some aspects of culture will tell him that's predatory behavior to tell your partner that all you can do is think about having sex with her, and then you walk in the door and you push her down on the entryway floor and fuck her right there. Like, that's horrible. But is it? I mean, in a safe space where there's boundaries and agreement, and he knows what I want, and I know that I'm safe, and he knows what I want, and he knows that I'm safe, that can be liberating for both partners. Some researchers have talked about men want to be aggressive, but they don't want to be seen as predatory, and so they hold that part of them back in a lot of ways. And what we as women, we as their partners can do for them is to open up to the ideas of what they like, what's your fantasy, safe space, tell me all the horrible things you can imagine that turn you on, and let's figure out ways to make those safe, because our fantasies don't necessarily make us bad people. We can't really control what our fantasies are. What we control is what we do with them. That's what makes us a good or bad person. There's this thing called the rape fantasy that is out in the world that people talk about a lot. It's not really a rape fantasy. No woman wants to be raped. No one wants to be sexually assaulted violently. The rape fantasy is about the obsession fantasy. She wants to be, or the overcome fantasy. A lot of women, particularly women who have a history of sexual shame, being raised in sexual shame culture, therapists have talked about how those women often want to be tied up because then they can't resist. They have to enjoy it. It frees them from the guilt and shame. So maybe I have a fantasy of being raped or overcome or tied up or taken against my will because of the shame that I feel around sex. And that is the only way that I can ignore that shame and then actually be able to experience it. If that were me, that would be really hard for me to share with my partner, right? I mean, but with the help of therapy, with the help of maturity, with the help of a trusted partner, being able to share that possibility could really create an opportunity for you to enjoy sex when you maybe never have before. So I have one of my romance novels. She is a sexual shame culture survivor, and that is exactly her situation. She really struggles not just to orgasm, but to have pleasure. And one of the things about my heroes that I try to fight toxic masculinity, and this hero is one of them. He has a really big dick, but it's not the greatest thing ever. Like, there's a lot of care that has to go into it. You can't have sex a couple hours later with a big dick. Nope, you got to wait a couple days. You got it's kind of a one-shot deal there, fellas. So,
One done.
So it's not, maybe in the locker room, a big dick sounds like a great idea. In the bedroom, it's a little bit may not be the greatest idea. I mean, men with big dicks have perfectly satisfying sex lives, but it takes a lot more effort. And again, it's kind of a one-shot deal. You're not going to have sex with your partner a couple hours later. You're not going to go away for a weekend and have sex 10 times in 2 days. That's not going to happen with her. Like, it's just not. And so if that's something you want more of an average size dick if you want to have that kind of experience. So all of you men out there with average size dicks, winning, take your partner, out for a weekend and have sex as many times as you want. Um, yeah. So anyway, like he again, he's part of his journey. He's got some stuff wrapped up around sexuality, and so um, they together sort of have to find their way to a healthy sexual relationship. He struggled. He had a partner that wanted him to dominate her, and he couldn't do it. But now he's with a partner that really needs him to tie her up, and he's kind of struggling with what they have to talk about the boundaries in that space. She needs to be restrained so that she can really let go, and he needs to be okay with restraining her, and so they have to kind of figure out that safe space together. So um, that's what, like I said, that's in one of my books, and similar kinds of um, wounds and challenges around sex, and needing to communicate and come together and figure out what works for them as a couple, not what society says they should be doing. So
Yeah, and I think, and you said it so well, I think it comes down to being able to be in a safe space where you can communicate with one another. So, and I talked to some people that are in sort of BDSM type relationships, and so a lot of the relationship is about the negotiation that they have and talking about boundaries and safe words and limits and all of those things. And that's yeah, there's and I think that's really sexy having those conversations, like you were saying, the sort of
mhm,
texting and back and forth and etc. etc. That's putting more communication than we would have normally when we go to bed on a Thursday night. I think it's Thursday night we should have sex now, and that's the sort of, as opposed to that sort of texting, messaging, flirting. That's something that we, yeah, maybe move away from. But I do think that ability to be able to communicate, to talk about it, is part of the pleasure. Like I say,
mhm,
it's not just the thing; it's the whole build up. Anything that's anything that you look forward to, whether it's a chocolate cake or it's a holiday or it's a particular sexual activity, it's got to be more exciting than something that just is the norm. So I do think it's something that has, yeah, something that you're looking forward to is in the future. You're going to go away, you're going to role play, and you're going to meet your partner in a hotel bar, and you don't know each other, and you're going to seduce her there. And then all those things are, yeah,
mhm,
they're absolutely normal, but the build up, I think, is one of the good things, which I think in your story, there is the build up. You sort of know,
mhm,
if you've read one or two, you know what's going to come, hopefully, but it's how you get there. It's the build
mhm.
up to which I think is really tantalizing in a way.
Absolutely. Um, yeah, absolutely. I think I'm not involved in the BDSM community, but I have read a lot of books by people in the BDSM community, not romance novels about BDSM. Again, as I may have mentioned, like romance novels about BDSM are not about really BDSM. They're about power and obsession and those kinds of things. So uh, that's just a vehicle that makes that easy to write about. Uh, One of the things that those of us not in the BDSM community can really learn from that community is consent and
Mhm.
communication.
Yeah.
They do that phenomenally well. And we all can do ourselves a service and read some books about real life in the BDSM community and what that's like, how that the logistics, if you will, of how that happens. Consent and communication about what you want, what you like, what you want to get out of the experience. When does it start? When does it stop?
Mhm.
What are you comfortable with? What are you not comfortable with? Those kinds of conversations are so essential, and they can happen in sexy ways, and they can happen in less sexy ways. I mean, 50 Shades of Grey, he had her sign a contract. I don't think that's all that
Yes.
unusual. I mean, I think sometimes there is that.
Yeah.
Um, but for the most part, it's being authentic about yourself, being authentic in this space, and brave enough to say, this is what I want. This is what I really like. I don't like this. I I really want this. I want you to be the one that does it. And then to be the recipient of that information, to be that wanted, to be that trusted. Yeah, that's got to be a high in and of itself. So, we can learn a lot from that community, and I encourage people to read books that are written by people in the BDSM community. There's plenty of information out there, a lot of it available for free at your library. Um, a lot of these books are can be found at your library. There's a book called Bottoming and a book called Topping. Those are the ones that come to mind um, as a place to start. Those should be available in your library. And then they'll have resources that they reference. You know, find a authentic resource and then do some research. And on my website, I have a resources tab, ChristinaBraver.com, the resources tab. I have a list of the books that I recommend and have found most helpful from by sex therapists about what we maybe call normal. Although I don't know, I don't know if I want to use that word or not, but by sex therapists that are working with people who are having all kinds of struggles to just wanting to have pleasurable sex. And then I also have some books on there where I recommend that are around the BDSM community. And so I do reference that Bottoming book and Topping book. This is a start for information, and then look at other resources and really learn about that space, because there's a lot that we can take away from that. I read a book we're talking about our teens, or talking about coming of age people and how to help them. I read a book by Peggy Orenstein, wrote a couple books, one called Girls and Sex and one called Boys and Sex, which I highly recommend for parents to read. Really, really helpful. But the Boys and Sex book, she interviewed young men from 18 to 24 about all different things. Each chapter is about different things. And one of her chapters was on consent and talking about how, you know, boys really don't get a lot of information about consent and expectations. And then she interviewed one guy, you know, and guys were kind of like, I hate to always ask, you know, can I do this? Can I do that? It takes me out of the mood or whatever. And then this other boy was like, oh no, I love consent. Like he took it as positive reinforcement. Do you like this? Yes. Okay, let's do this more. Oh, do you like when I touch you here? Yes. Oh, let's do this more. You know, which I thought that was such a refreshing perspective. If we
Yeah.
looked at consent as positive reinforcement, maybe then it won't have this sort of negative taboo. So there's a ton of there's so much information out there to be obtained and read that will change your life, I think. And I try to incorporate that in a lot of my romance novels, because romance is much more accessible. You know, the romance industry is a $1.4 billion annual industry. There's a lot of people reading a
Amazing.
lot of romance every year, and if I can put some information in there, and sometimes, or this might be the first place that a woman reads that she has agency, that she's supposed to have pleasure, that men are not just supposed to dominate her in an aggressive and violent way, that there are men who care about her pleasure, or it's okay or sexy or desirable to have a man who's more interested, or at least as interested in her pleasure as his own.
Mm.
Um, Romance novels might be the first place that people read that, or and even more so, might be the first place that people read about healthy sexual relationships between same-sex partners, healthy sexual relationships between interracial couples, people of all genders and all sexual orientations. There's a romance novel out there for you. They're not all just about heterosexual. At one time, they seem to all be about heterosexual um, couples, you know, white heterosexual couples, cisgender heterosexual couples, and that those days are no longer there. In 2019, there was a huge kerfuffle in the Romance Writers of America, which is the largest romance writing professional organization, over racism, and most of the big traditional publishers, if not all of them, were implicated. Some very high level authors were implicated, and organizations were implicated, and it was sort of a social media explosion. And what came out of that is a lot of sort of messages that writers were getting. Well, nobody wants to read nobody wants to read a romance novel about a neurodivergent character, so I'm not going to, you know, someone who has autism, I'm not going to publish that. And what turns out is, no, there's a huge market for that kind of information.
Yeah.
Um, you know, and so you have novels being written by people that include, like I said, characters of all orientations, all neurodivergent characters. Some of those are super well done and really popular. Um, Characters, heroines that are older, people of different ages. You know, you're not romance novels are so much more diverse in the
Mm.
traditional sense of the word too now. So um, Yeah, romance novels are a great way to get some information out into the world, and then check out Christina Braver's resources tab and read some books by sex therapists and get some real information that can be helpful in your relationship as well.
Yeah, but the whole romance genre seems to have exploded in the last few years. You get the sort of, I'm going to get the names wrong, sort of romantasy, like romance and
Hmm.
fantasy. And if you want to have sex with a vampire or a dragon or a werewolf or whatever, it's all there. But it's so
Right.
much more. Yeah, my daughter's got, was it Iron Flame and Onyx Storm and a few others like that, and I picked them up and thought, oh my goodness, and
Right.
they're
Right.
very very. I think they're quite well written, but there's a good story, but there's sex in there as well, and there's dragons in there, and who doesn't love dragons and sex really? I mean, come on, what is there not to love
I
there? But I
I
do like the openness that people have now.
Yeah. I mean, I don't read romantasy and I don't read fantasy, but I get it. It's a huge it is very popular. So I don't write fantasy either. I just don't have the world building in that space. I'm just
Yeah,
not creative about dragons and vampires and things like I just don't that's not where I am. I'm much more creative about here is a here's a wound, here's a wound, here these people fall in love, what happened, what explosion happens with people would have those two wounds when they get together. Um, but it is huge. One of the things that I think has prompted that. Now, romantasy is, there's a lot of people that are super into fantasy and science fiction for all kinds of reasons. But one of the things that happens, an orc and a vampire can have sex, and neither one of them has to have agency. So an orc can rape a vampire, or a vampire can rape an orc, and it's a little bit more easily
yeah,
tolerated
yeah,
than if a man rapes a woman or a woman rapes a man in a book.
yeah,
Um, that so there's and that, I just use that as an example to say that in fantasy the rules are a little you can make up your own rules, whereas when you're dealing with um, human representations of human characters, there's a little bit more. We have to be a little bit more
yeah.
careful what we promote
Mhm.
because people will identify more with those people and people will think, oh, this is what I'm supposed to do or this is what it's supposed to be like. And then we're down the porn rabbit hole of three pumps and she comes kind of thing. Like then we're putting information out there that's not helpful. So um, yeah, so I think one of the great things about fantasy and romantasy is that the rules are so much more flexible, and so you can create you can create things that really hit those fantasies that are not safe
Yeah,
in real life, right? You can really hit some of those things hard, which is great and fulfilling and important, and much safer to do between an orc and a vampire than two human representations, I think. So, but I don't know if that's why fantasy has become so popular recently, but it might be why. Just looking
mm.
at sort of the information that I have and the
Yeah, that
research
makes
that I've
sense.
done, I've kind of
Yeah.
created that theory. So I own it. I own it. It's mine. It might be wrong. I also say it
No,
might
I
be
think it
wrong.
makes sense.
So,
This is a slightly cheeky question, so apologies. When people say that, does that give them free rein to say anyway? I'll say anyway. So when people meet you or meet you and your husband and they've read the books, do they sort of assume that they're autobiographical or well, she must know it, she'd write it. If you haven't lived it, you can't write it.
I know. It's a little bit funny. Again, I had shared with you before we started recording. My husband is a scientist. He's a data
Yes,
researcher,
data,
very,
data, data.
data driven, and thank God, what I struggled with some bouts of depression, some stress raising teenagers, and it really impacted our sex life. And what does a scientist do when they have a problem that they can't solve? They do research. So my husband went off and said, "Okay, how can I make this better for my wife? Like what can I do? Has anybody ever experienced this situation? What can I do to make it better?" He read some books, we read some books together, and we found our way back to each other in a very healthy way. And so I'm super grateful for that. So I encourage all spouses, if you're having problems, do some research. It's out there. Um, but it is funny. People see him. He works. He's sort of, I think, um, a respected professional in his role, and I think he presents a very professional and stoic. He's German, so a little bit stoic persona. So when people find out what I do, it's sort of like fodder for conversation. His coworkers are like, what? And he did have a close friend ask him once, like, so like, is your dick in this? You know, he's like, I don't know that I can answer that. So no, yes, people sometimes will be like, you know, what does your husband think about that? And I even had someone respond to an article that I wrote saying, I really feel bad for your husband that you have all these fantasies and he's not, it's not him. So I don't know that I could be okay with my wife fantasizing about other men the way that you do. And it was funny. I wrote back to the person before I even talked to my husband, but I was like, my husband's good. He's fine. But like that night at dinner, I said something to my husband about it and he actually guffawed. He's like, no, I'm fine. I'm good. I'm good with what you do. Um, so people do have comments sometimes about is this autobiographical? No, it's fiction. It's fiction. Um, there are aspects of the heroes that, particularly the first book, there's aspects of that hero that are a lot like my partner. Um, he was my first hero. Of course, I'm going to use some of the things that I love about my partner and put those into the creation of my first, fiction hero. So there's definitely some similarities there, but no, it's all fiction. I sort of have to giggle when people, but because my husband, I think it's so funny to me because he's so private and he's so, you know, Mr. Stoic experienced, professional man. The idea that I would be writing books about our sex life that's true, that's actually what's happening in our sex life is just preposterous.
Yeah.
It's sort of funny, but I mean, sometimes he'll get cheeky and he'll be like, "Yeah, they're all me." you know, even the ones with the big dicks. Yeah, those are me.
Yeah. Everything. Yeah.
Everything's me. Yeah, he's a great sport. I mean, he was the one who said, why don't you write one? So he's been on board from the beginning. He's my greatest supporter in all kinds of ways, and yeah, so I think it's kind of funny.
Would you ever write a novel that wasn't set in the Northwest, that sent the characters off on a vacation? They're in London
Yeah.
or they're in Paris or New York or.
Yeah, yeah, yes. I have a novel that's written in set there in Vegas.
Okay.
That's a novella that's set in Vegas, and then the book that I'm writing now is a vacation romance there in Hawaii.
Ah, okay.
So, mostly because there's a lot of people from the Pacific Northwest, we go to Hawaii. So, a lot of people from the East Coast and the Midwest, they'll go to Florida. It's
Mhm.
kind of a thing. Um, a lot of people from the West Coast go to Southern California, Mexico, or Hawaii. That's kind of if you can afford it, that's our kind of vacation thing. So I've been to Hawaii a couple of times, and so yeah, I sent them on a vacation to Hawaii. Um, I love to write. You'd ask the question, why I write in the Pacific Northwest and how that impacts the story. And the natural beauty out here is, I've
Yeah.
heard readers say that the natural beauty is another character in my book.
It is. It
And
is
I,
very, and you get the not only the visual information from the book, but you get the sense of the sound, smells, and colors from the way you write. So yeah, you can absolutely feel the time of the year, and I think that's really important. It's 'cause I think setting the scene in a place is one thing, but then positioning everything around it. So yeah, I really like that.
thank you. Yeah,
Now, Hawaii is
I
a good
try really
idea. I
hard.
guess you had to go to Hawaii to do some research, no doubt, for your your book.
Right,
But
right, right.
there's also something about intimacy and relationships and sex on a vacation. It's different, isn't
Mhm.
it?
Oh
You're
yes.
sort of leaving behind a lot of the washing machine's leaking or the tumble drying is washing up. All that crap's gone because like I say, a bit like the BDSM thing. Everything's taken care for you, apart from the fact
Hmm.
you're just there to have pleasure. And I think
Hmm.
that's
Right.
why a lot of people have yeah, maybe better, more frequent sex on vacations than at
Right.
home. So gosh, so this book's going to be just full of sex then, even more than before.
It it might actually be the one that has the most sex in it. Um, the scene I'm writing right now, or that I struggled with yesterday, is they actually have sex twice in that one chapter,
Oh,
and there's a reason for it, but trying to make sure that that flows. That I'm not just making them have sex because I love to write those scenes and it's super fun. Um, so yeah, it's definitely important. And
yeah,
the space and where you are. And you're right. Vacations, we are away from a lot of our
yeah,
responsibilities and our normal roles, and we're wearing different clothes, we're eating
yeah,
different food, we're seeing different things. It's okay to it feels okay to sort of be a little different. And
yeah,
particularly if you are a mom and a dad and you're on vacation, just the two of you away from your kids, particularly for the mom, that estrogen stuff, her testosterone levels are going to be a little bit higher if she's
yeah.
not worrying about kids and dinner and taking care of you. Like, don't be another kid that she has to take care of.
Mhm.
Be your own man. And, her testosterone levels are going to be a little bit more high, and that's going to impact her sex drive. And you don't have the same things to worry about. And we talked about how, before we started recording, that people out over 60 have the report having the best sex.
Yeah.
And part of the reason is because, um, no cock blocking. Your kids have moved out. It's just the two of you at home. You can have
Yes.
sex in the middle of the day. You can, in fact, a lot of people who are older do have sex in the middle of the day. I read I read a story, an account by a couple, and they have standing sex date Tuesdays and Thursdays. He's a landscaper. They both live in the same retirement community, both retired. He's retired landscaper, but he does kind of some work around the community. Um, and she usually goes to his house, and he will call her the night before and say, I've been thinking about you. Can't wait to do these things to you. So then that gets her going a little bit. So then the next day he's like cleans his bedroom, cleans the sheets, lights a candle. He will file. He'll I guess file like calluses on his hands if he has, because her skin is fragile and his hands are rough. So he files them, and she was talking about sometimes she'll knock on the door and he'll answer the door and he'll still be filing his fingers, and she's like, I get wet just from that, you know, just from that experience of knowing he's preparing for her.
Yeah.
But then they have sex, then they get naked, they kiss, they touch, they do comforting things for each other. They have a snack, they take a break, have snack, come back. They meet like around 10, have snack around noon, come back to the bedroom, do some more fun stuff together. Maybe they're done around 2. She goes home, he goes back to whatever. It's a thing that they do, and it's not doesn't have all these trappings of a dinner out and all this pressure and all this fancy stuff. It's just intimate time together. Um, and you can do that on a vacation, even when you aren't over 60. You can have that kind of sex on a vacation. And so I think,
Absolutely. Isn't it?
yeah, so I think vacation sex is a really good thing.
Yeah, I love the thought of the filing his hands or whatever, just to yeah. So he's in, yeah. That's really lovely. Mm.
Right. He's not doing it to turn her on. He's doing it to be prepared for
Yeah,
her, but it's the effort that he puts into and care for her that just does it for her. So, yeah. And I think that's a lot of couples. I think that's a lot of women see their partner putting in the effort to prepare for them. That's going to make them feel seen and loved and safe, and that's going to help them open up, and it's going to let off some of those breaks like I talked about earlier.
yeah. I think a lot of men don't realize that. Not that many expert, but women get turned on by different things to men. So if the man doesn't normally cook and the woman comes home and the man's cooked a beautiful meal or whatever, then that's a turn on. If he's taking out the rubbish without being asked, if he said, like, I'll do the kids this weekend, whatever, that's a turn on. It's not because we don't think of it in that way. That wouldn't turn me on, somebody cooking for me. But it is those things that show recognition and hold space for somebody and just show, like, say you have that devotion and desire for them, so you're doing things without feeling it's going to please them, whatever. But it's something that it does. Yeah, filing your hands, cooking a meal, whatever. That is a
Mhm.
yeah, that is a turn on.
I think, and I mean, I think that's absolutely true. We have to be careful that it doesn't, in the minds of the men that are hearing this, that it doesn't become a tit for tat. I took out the rubbish and now I
Yeah.
need you to blow me,
Yes. Right.
right?
Yeah. I absolutely. Yes.
You should
Feels
want to
like
blow
no,
me.
no.
Um, and that we got to be careful with that. But I think you're absolutely right. I mean, it's doing these things because you see her and you love her.
Yeah.
I know women with young children talk about being touched out, like they don't want to have sex because they just cannot be touched. I've been
Yeah.
clung to, and I went through that when my children were small. Like I please stop touching me. I can't handle anybody else, and knowing that that's not about him, like she's not rejecting him. It's important to sort of maybe come out of that a little bit and say, is this what's going on? Are you just overtouched
Mhm.
from the kids? Like maybe can we get a babysitter and go out in the afternoon for a
Yeah.
while and then, or maybe the kids can go to grandma and grandpa or to aunt and uncle, how can we give you some space where you're not overtouched so that when I touch you, it isn't something that's like, oh my God, this is another person that I have to do something for, right?
Yeah.
Um, so knowing why taking out the rubbish and doing the dinner, it appeals to her and making sure that it isn't just a tit for tat thing, because then that's
Yeah.
just gonna,
You don't keep a note in your
don't
notebook
keep
saying,
don't
right
keep
now
record
this
it.
is for.
Uh, yeah, because that's not what that's not very helpful either. But yeah, men have, someone asked me if I'd ever write a lesbian romance, a female, a vulva, a same gender romance, and I said, I just don't. I'm I'm not interested in women in that way, and so I think it would be difficult for me to write it. I
Mm.
have some reference to I have a side character that is a gay couple, two men,
Mhm.
but they're side characters. I don't do. I write first person, so their story is not first person because I am not a gay man. Um, but I said, oh, I just don't know that I could because I really like penis. Like I just really like penis. So, you know, I really like men. I really, really like men, and I hate what is happening in the world to our men. And it's so hard to watch them hurt and then watch them hurt women and knowing that it doesn't have to be that way. And yeah, I want to do everything that I can to support men in knowing that it's okay for them to not know everything and it's okay for them to share that and to talk with their partner about how to make sex fulfilling for both of us. And it doesn't make you less of a man. In fact, it makes you more of a man. And if you have a partner that doesn't see that, then that's maybe a red flag for you. It's important to look at that. What does your partner expect? What kind of man does your partner expect you to be? Um, and creating a safe space to have those conversations. But yeah, I think there's so many men out there that are hurting, and we don't see it as a culture because the patriarchy has harmed so many people. And I
Yeah.
think the patriarchy has particularly harmed men because the
Mm.
patriarchy has said that men are all this way. They are this one thing. And we need to fight against that. And like I said, I have a 22-year-old son. He's kind of like, what did I do? What have
Yeah.
I done? I
Yeah.
love my girlfriend. I don't understand why I'm a bad guy. And I think he's not alone. I think there's a lot of men his age that are like, what did I do? And I think we just have a real responsibility to care for our men. And the same, we care for our women, yes, but we also need to care for our men.
I've taken up a lot of your time. You've got a book to finish. So I have one final question, if that's okay.
Yeah, I
And
love to talk about this stuff. I would talk all day if you let me, so no problem.
well, let's speak again in 18 days' time when you've when you've got the book in.
Yes, yes, that's right, exactly.
No, it was just see you invest a lot in your characters, in your books, in your family, your friends, everything. How do you look after your own mental and physical well-being? How do you make sure that you're at the sort of top of your game mentally to be able to do all these things?
Oh, that's a really great question. How do I do that? Um, well, I love what I write.
Hmm.
And I try not to feel guilty, particularly right now, all the things that I have to put aside. I actually told someone a couple of days ago, if you're not in my family with an emergency, don't, I will not talk to you. I cannot talk to you right now. And she was like, oh my gosh, thank you for being so direct.
Hmm.
It's like, I can't do anything for you right now. And so I do try to be very direct about those things when I'm in this stressful point. having these conversations about why I'm writing and why I'm passionate about this is caretaking for me, because it reminds me that what I'm doing is important. I think a lot of writers, unless we're fabulously successful making tons of money, fabulously successful as conventionally defined, right?
Yeah.
Making tons of money, we feel like we're imposters. We feel like what we're doing is not important. And I have to remember through these conversations that what I'm doing is important, that everybody who reads my book and gets something out of it, um, that's a purpose. I went to a book club once, and one of the women said, "Oh, I read your book. I was so turned on. I masturbated 3 times, and then I had sex with my husband." And I was like, "Job done. My work is done." Yeah.
How does Yeah, that's not the sort of feedback I've ever had. Your husband's ever had with his data work, or maybe he has. I don't know, but
Oh,
but
right.
yeah,
I don't know. Maybe it's very sexy. He does talk about
oh,
sexy data, but yes. I mean, I think doing that, having a supportive partner who is, and sharing with him my fears and my imposter syndrome, surrounding myself with support, and then my faith. I'm a Christian. My faith community is super supportive, and um, that is a big part of how I'm able. I feel called to do this. I it is part of my faith to do this. Um, I think that, like I said before, the clitoris, it's the only, its only purpose is sexual pleasure. I think it's an insult to the creator that we don't use it. And so I'm working very hard to try to make it be used more. So,
absolutely. Make the most of it. 100%.
right. So you're trying to make yeah, exactly. Trying to make the most of that. And so I remind myself of that calling, and that is helpful. And then wine and good food, bread and wine.
I know I said that was the last question. I obviously lied. So when will the next book be out? What is it called?
So the next book is called Hawaii for Two, and
Hmm.
it will be out this summer. I'm hoping July, but it's probably looking more like August.
Okay.
Um, but yes, it will be out this summer. Hawaii for Two. Look for it. It's a standalone, so
Oh,
it's
nice.
not part of a series. It's a great place to. It's a great book to pick up to get introduced to my writing. And but be careful, because you'll totally fall in love with Levi, my hero. He's just so he's so fabulous. He's so great. I want all men to be like him.
I'll look out for it and try and model myself on him then. Yeah. Oh, sorry, I didn't know you were right in the midst of writing it and getting it finished. So thank you so much for finding the time to squeeze me in, even though I'm not family with an emergency. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
I wasn't sure what to expect. I read your email back and forth. I read your stories, and yeah, I think you're great. I think you're
Thank
really
you.
interesting, passionate, kind person. You're doing something really
Thank you.
important, and most importantly, you seem to love what you're doing, and that's such an amazing thing to see, really. So no, I really appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for this time. And like I said, this is this refills my cup. So I can
Oh,
go now and write. This refills my cup a little bit. So thank you so much for taking the time and for having me on. It was such a pleasure. And I hope that your listeners get something out of it. Especially the men, please know that there are women out there who see you and love you and want the best for you in a good way. So uh, hopefully pick up a book, mine or someone else's, and explore sexual pleasure with your partner.
perfect.